Welcome to Nourishing the Mother, an inspired conversation space between Bridget Wood and Julie Tenner on the journey of motherhood through the common thread of parenting, relationship, and sexuality as a path to consciousness.
We keep our conversations honest, our experiences real, and our philosophies exploratory. We believe that in order to raise incredible humans, we first have to raise ourselves. We know that in order to rock the family, you've got to nourish the mother. If you are here, you care about paving a path of conscious and intentional motherhood, connected with yourself and your gifts, and also illuminating your children in theirs so we may raise more whole humans who can impact this world in a more humane way.
If you desire to integrate your learnings practically and supportively, head on over to bridgetwood.life or julietenner.love to go deeper. And for all live-streamed pre-release podcasts and all our free content, head over to our free Facebook group, Nourishing the Mother with Bridget Wood and Julie Tenner. We are Julie Tenner and Bridget Wood, and we are so grateful you're here.
Hello and welcome to Nourishing the Mother. I'm Bridget Wood.
And I'm Julie Tenner. And today's podcast is Let's Lift the Veil on the shame of postpartum healing. So I don't have an agenda with this at all, but I did bring it to Bridget and say, I just want to have a conversation that says enough of the fucking shame. Because maybe some of our listeners know, maybe some of them don't. It depends. This is my point. Depends how long you've been listening for and whether you happen to have caught that tiny moment that we talked about, the fact that I have a vaginal prolapse. And so I said, let's have a podcast that's dedicated to this and wherever else we end up going, instead of this shame and secrecy and like behind closed doors experiences that I am sure I'm not the only one having. And yet we're all the only ones having the experience we think we're the only ones having in our own separate worlds, and therefore can never bring this fullness. Is always like this weight that we're carrying.
As you're saying that, I'm actually thinking about so many facets of motherhood or pregnancy or loss. Even like, you don't know how many people have a miscarriage until you have a miscarriage, and you're like, oh my God, like this is just this unspoken thing that you don't know you're part of until other women then see that they've got permission to tell you their story. And the shame that's around prolapse and any other kind of postpartum injury or healing that needs to take place is that it's not something that is spoken about or valued because women's health is not valued.
Okay, this is literally the reason I wanted to talk about this.
That is the point, right? Like we have this pervasive 6 weeks and then you're good to go because we don't actually value the rehabilitation of women's bodies or, you know, even the caring for them in the first place. If we valued the caring for them in the first place, we wouldn't have the level of intervention that we have in birth. We wouldn't have the level of instrumental delivery that we know is a direct result. Like, let me just make a point. The problem is not vaginal births. The problem is that the way that our birthing system interferes with vaginal births.
Yeah.
Because when you allow a women's physiology to naturally birth, rarely will you have significant injury. But you insert an instrument and pull out a baby that's not quite ready to be born through a women's body that has not been hormonally primed to open, then you're going to have problems. But we put it back on the woman and her wants and her needs and her unrealistic expectations of her body and her birth, not the system we've created that harms women and make it women's problems that they deal with in isolation, in shame, that comes up in sexual dysfunction, that comes up in relationship pain, that comes up with body shame and low self-worth.
Man, like I'm like reaching for my box of tissues next to me as I just like feel the levity of everything that you just said.
Mm.
And it makes me so fucking angry.
Yeah.
It just makes me so angry. So I'll start probably in the middle of my story because there was something that just like rung out to me when you were speaking just then, which is how we don't prioritize women's healthcare. Mm. We're not really invested in women's bodies. So, you know, I'm going to cry my way.
I'm ready for the sermon. I am ready for the sermon.
Well, also just so everyone prepares themselves, I will be snot crying my way through this entire experience because I'm still processing.
Mm.
So the invitation that we have here is that we get to do this together and that I am willing to be seen in not having the answers.
Yeah.
But in having a shit fucking ton of questions.
Yeah.
So,
I'm going to help you as best as I can through that.
Thank you.
Mm.
Thank you. Oh. So I have been on a prolapse journey for a really long time. So Gwen is turning 5 in like 4 months or something. And my prolapse developed during her pregnancy. Well, I will rephrase what I know now, which is I first became aware of it in her pregnancy.
And this is your pregnancy with your 4th child?
With my 4th child, yes. And no one checked me over post-birth. No one told me I had a prolapse. I worked it out for myself, going, things are different. What is this? This is no longer just because I thought it was the heaviness and the weight bearing of a baby. And then I thought it was the inflammation and the healing after birth. And then when it stayed, I was like, oh, this is something totally different. And even when I went for my 6-week checkup, I had to ask the dismissive GP about it. I had to ask. And there was nothing. It was just like, oh, yeah, well, you've got that. You should go get that looked at. And I was like, fucking okay. So in the scheme of the 5 years that I've known about it, I have gone to medical practitioners. I've gone to pelvic floor physio specialists. I've done 2 different types of pelvic floor or pelvic healing courses. I've done yoga specialist pelvic floor classes, exercise and programs. I've done physio-specific exercise programs. I've done jade egg practice. I've done de-armoring. I've done vaginal mapping. I've done genitourinary specialist, chiropractors and osteos. I have fucking done everything. I have been everywhere. And yet it got worse. And so in the end, TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, acupuncture, which I actually have to tell you is the only thing that made a significant difference, which I found fascinating because I actually didn't know that would happen. But it was the only thing that actually alleviated to the greatest degree my symptoms.
Because that worked with the subconscious and the meridian system, do you think?
Well, because there was in prolapse, there's like a collapse, there's a heaviness, there's a pulling downwards in the body. So with a prolapse, there's actually a lot of pain involved. So I get regular cramping. You know, that I don't know if any of you have ever experienced that dragging sensation in a period where you kind of always feel like your labia is like being pulled.
Yes, like or even sometimes like I'm at the end of a cold and I can feel it in my pelvic floor.
Yeah.
Bit of weight there that you don't.
Yeah, there's this aching, heaviness, cramping, discomfort that impacts my life to the point now where I can't jump and I can't run. It's too uncomfortable.
Which has an enormous impact on like the quality of like your life. It's not just like one area of your life. It's
enormous.
Yeah, areas of your life.
Significant. Yeah, yeah. Anyway, so And of course, there's been COVID and lockdown and all of things, so trying to move through a pathway. So when I came, for myself, I said I wanted to do all of the things that I could possibly do before I ended up with anyone and anything medical. So I have got to a point where I perceive that I have done as much as I can do, and yet I'm still here. So then I thought, okay, I'm going to go down this medical path and see what options there are for me in a mainstream medical path. And there ensued even its own, you know, awkwardness and shit show and people who don't really know very much, and going to this person and they send me to that specialist and that specialist doesn't do that, so I needed to be sent to a different specialist. Like, it's like reorienting through birth again. There's like, you're trying to work your own fucking pathway out.
Like the web of a dysfunctional system.
Yeah. Anyway, finally, a couple of weeks ago, I got an appointment with this, I can't think what she's called, but uropelvic surgical specialist.
Mm-hmm.
And I just praise the Lord, the divine substance that brought me there, because she's fucking amazing. Like,
what a relief.
The first person.
Oh, Jules.
Like, it was fucking epic to sit there with her and have an actual proper exam. Like, someone who could actually properly say, here is the dysfunction. And she's the first person that I perceive didn't blame me.
Oh.
Because everywhere you go, it's because I'm not doing it enough, because I've let my pelvic floor go, because I haven't done enough exercises, because I'm not disciplined enough, whatever.
Mm.
And here was this woman that said to me, you know why it's not working? Because on your right-hand side, one half of your pelvic floor is torn. It's not connected.
Oh.
And no one said that to me ever. So it wouldn't have mattered how much fucking exercises I did when something, your whole right-hand side of my pelvis is not connected. Mm. There's nothing holding it together. There's no ligament supporting it. All of the fascia that would be around the outside of my vagina and essentially creates that wall between other organs and the vagina itself is completely torn.
Mm.
And this happened in my first birth.
Your first birth?
16 years ago.
How could she figure that out? Like, how?
Because of she said that's usually what it is. And when we looked at my birth history, it was my first birth that was fucking horrific with the pushing.
Oh, God.
And even though I was in a birth centre and I had hired an independent midwife, she coached me to move against my body and push this baby out in the hospital's 45 fucking minutes. And I literally tore my pelvis apart and no one fucking told me. And I was in so much pain afterwards, and now it makes sense. No one said that's an unusual amount of pain. You know, I even remember my midwife inserting her value system over me because I had a tear of part of the hymen tag that kind of hangs like a bit of flesh out of my vagina now. And I remember at the time the surgical staff going, oh, well, we'll just put a couple of stitches in there. And she's like, no, you don't want stitches in there, do you? Like, you just want to stay. There's no shame in your body being what it is now after birth. But I never had that agency.
Mm.
So I'm angry. I'm angry at what we do to women's bodies that we think is okay. Yeah. I'm angry that I wasn't given the 2 or 3 hours that I probably needed as a first-time mum to push.
Mm.
It for my own body, not on a timeline. I'm angry that no one looked after me afterwards or told me that that wasn't normal. I'm angry at the system. And then this gorgeous, beautiful surgeon, she sat there and said, and the problem with this, Julie, is we will spend billions of dollars. Men will spend billions of dollars getting us to the moon, but we don't have a surgical procedure to fix either of these things that have happened in women's bodies since the beginning of time. And the truth of that just really landed. She was like, no white man will pay the money to research a procedure that does this for women's bodies. But we'll spend billions getting to the fucking moon or whatever. But women's bodies who have experienced versions of this forever, we still don't know how to fix. We don't know how to put those ligaments back together. We don't know how to put that fascia back together. We don't have a procedure for it. So your broken body, woman, we will shame you for the fact that your vagina doesn't look perfect or isn't functionally perfect, but we also won't invest in fixing it. Like, how fucked is that?
That is absolutely fucked up. And when you use that kind of illustration, it's just, I find it absolutely disgusting.
Yeah. So I have this beautiful woman of colour, young, sitting in front of me, feminist, like she's just the most exquisite human, and I'm sitting there going, thank fuck. Thank fuck. It took a new generation of women to say this to me, and nobody has in the whole time. So anyway, so just the anger for me that has bubbled up in how we treat women's bodies and what we don't invest in, and yet what we expect from them, has really hit me.
And how we, I guess, try to, thinking about you when you said you probably just needed a few more hours, like the way in which we try to force our bodies or contort them in ways that they're not designed to be maneuvered into, and then the ramifications of that.
Yeah.
Even I was thinking about when you were talking, I was thinking because of the way that we do this to our bodies, because we've learned that their fullness and their ferocity and their natural rhythm and pace is not to be trusted, we have this kind of injury that can lay latent in the body for years, and that it's probably rare a woman that hasn't got some birth-related injury because of how we're told we need to birth. I mean, even with Sylvie's birth when I was in hospital, and I remember hanging off you, and I was under induction, so there was a clear time limit on that.
Yeah.
And I had a sense of that. But I was not, I was working so hard and I was bearing down so hard, and I don't doubt that had impacts, because I had the same question to a midwife afterwards, because there's some kind of I don't know if it's the hymen tag or something that's different in my pelvic floor since that birth. And so what was the impact of me having to work harder to make sure the hospital didn't try to ship me off for a C-section because I didn't meet the requirements of their induction timeline, right? And women are having to make these choices, or, don't even get a choice, right? I was obviously consciously making the choice, I'll push my body hard right now because it's this or that. It's this injury or that injury.
Yeah. Right.
Because it's not, my body's not doing the thing that the system says my body has to do.
But even yes, all of that. And then, not even if, and then nothing to support the damage.
Yeah.
Afterwards.
So after it's happened, because no one's paying attention to what the woman needs, right? If we're really to heal, we're talking about something for you that probably needs surgical intervention, therefore, which no one has trained for.
Yeah.
Right. So what are you supposed to do?
Yeah.
But if we're talking basic healing after birth, we're talking get women off their feet.
Yeah.
We're talking it is absolutely imperative that she is waited on so that we don't have this kind of damage. I mean, like, hysterectomies have been routinely done to women throughout history simply because it was easier than paying attention to what that woman needed postpartum. Really. I mean, my grandmother, I mean, yeah, she had 12 children. So she had a hysterectomy. And then my mother's got a prolapse. And how much would we alleviate this if we invested in that woman?
Yeah, this is
the moment she's pregnant, right? Yeah. We're talking to her about, we're centering her pelvic health.
Right. What would it look like to have a system that centers pelvic health?
Beyond simply just do your Kegels. How do you say it? Whatever. However, I don't know.
I don't know. I think it depends with, American or not. Kegels.
Like beyond that.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know there are some Scandinavian countries, I think, that actually pay for postpartum physio. I think it's like done routinely, but that's definitely the exception.
It is the exception, and I would also argue potentially not even enough, because what I really needed was a thorough exam to work out what was here.
Yeah, and so if we don't have enough people trained because we don't value pelvic health, then how many other women's injuries are going to be missed like yours?
Yeah. Yes, and I'm just the whole thing just makes me angry that she's the first person to say to me, this isn't your fault.
Yeah. And did she like center the system as the problem?
Yeah. And I really felt like just her injustice at how the system treats women's pelvises.
Yeah.
Because that's all she would see is dysfunction of, prolapse and bladder and all of the things. And she was like, it makes me so angry. Makes me so angry. So it was that moment in my heart where I went, fuck, man, if I was a billionaire, I would go to her and say, I will fund it. Like, we can do better for women's bodies. And then part of me was like, that's also like so fucking beautiful. Because I've been looking for that cause that calls me, like, that cause that calls you beyond your own lifetime.
Yes. Yeah.
And I could feel it in that moment. And sometimes, like, I had that moment where I was like, that almost gives me drive to be a multi-billionaire because I want that so badly for women. You know that?
Yes.
So part of me was like, I'm so grateful because I do think it's those inspirations like that when life feels hard or the minutiae of getting there feels hard, to touch into that inspiration. Like, you can't buy that juice, right? So I'm also grateful for that. This podcast is brought to you by Tantric 101 Trust, which is a 5-lesson free course with me for 2 weeks only. It's free. And if you are wanting to reestablish, rebuild, reconnect, and create new trust within yourself, your body, your relationship, and your sexuality, then it's a fantastic place for you to start. You can find out more at julietenner.love.
And Flow, Mind, Body Mothering, which is really for you if you are feeling called for more support, more structure, more guidance gently from me on how to get past the overfunctioning, which leads you to resentment and disconnection and overwhelm in your mothering. And on the other side, find some more spaciousness. You can find out more about that at bridgetwood.life.
So where does that leave me? So where that leaves me is I can stay with my prolapse as it is. I mean, it's certainly not life-threatening. It's just lifestyle impeding. And for me, that comes with discomfort and pain, and I can't jump and I can't run with my kids.
Which
And
is
I'm sick of it.
And Julie, you're 40.
Right. That's exactly
like you're not 75.
Right. I've had enough. So the options are, I mean, essentially my problem is that because it's all collapsed and because it's taken so long and because I have both those injuries, is that my prolapse is front and back and top. So you can have 3 different versions of prolapse, and I have all 3. Lucky me.
Was it all 3 initially, though? I didn't think it was.
No, but it's gotten worse. Yeah. Which is the problem with prolapse, of course, because once that pressure starts and you've lost the structures that keep the pressure at bay, like your fascia.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you would know with a hernia, right? As soon as that fascia is not there, that pressure will just, it keeps finding a way to move into those pockets. So essentially a prolapse, once it's begun, just progressively gets worse. The period of time at which it deteriorates, of course, is individual and depends on how much you want to live with.
Yeah.
So there are these things called pessaries, which are like a silicone ring that you can insert, and they sit, the cervix kind of sits in the middle, and you kind of push up and hinge kind of on top of the pubic bone.
Yeah.
So it doesn't alter the prolapse in any way, but it alleviates the symptoms. So it alleviates the pain, the cramping, and the dragging. So I've used that, but because of my prolapse having all 3, it doesn't hold it as well. She's like, look, for some, it's just probably going to fall out, or it only partially does the job, which is exactly what it is for me. So that's not a long-term solution for me. So either I just leave it, which I've had enough, I don't want to.
Yeah.
Or I look at surgery, which is really fucking hard.
Yeah.
Right? I feel like I'm back here like at the fucking tonsils again going, I hit all of my conditioning.
Except this is the most sacred part of like for you.
Right.
Like everything.
So I hit all of my conditioning again. That's surgery is shameful and surgery is a cop-out, and I'm not saying that it is, but I can feel myself hit all of those judgments, and ultimately what we condemn, we breed, attract, or become, right? So here I am back again here, going through these same things, questioning my own belief systems and I don't know, neuroses. So what that looks like for me then is to fix the front and the back. She essentially has to cut the vaginal wall and folds it over itself. So it creates a pretend fascia, I suppose. It creates the double layer and pulls it back together, front and back. And then you have the option. I did laugh because, and it's also part of why I wanted to have this podcast, because it is also a call out just in case anyone has the answer for the question I'm about to ask, which is the option for the top is a hysterectomy. So they remove the uterus and the cervix and essentially close over the top of the vagina and suspend the vagina and attach it to other ligaments within they create like a pulley system within the pelvis itself, because obviously the ligament that they would normally attach it to in me is broken, so they can't attach it to that one. Or you keep your uterus and cervix and they pull the uterus up and attach the uterus that pulls everything else up to other ligaments higher up in the pelvic cavity. Apparently, on the 5-year studies that I've looked at everywhere, they both have essentially a 90% success rate, with people needing to potentially have surgery again to fix the prolapse as it deteriorates potentially over age and time.
Because gravity will do its thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So she was funny. She goes, so here's your 2 options. The only reason you would keep your uterus is if you're emotionally attached to it.
Me? Emotionally attached to my uterus?
So I literally laughed. Like, I let her finish her spiel because I wanted to know everything. I wanted to know all of my options. And then I laughed at her and I said, well, I am emotionally attached to my uterus. And she laughed at me and she went, okay, interesting. And I said to her, look, do you know, and I've reflected on it and talked to Nick about it, and I'm like, do you know, it's actually not my uterus. Like, I have like loved the shit out of my uterus. Like, I have felt connected to my uterus forever. I have meditated, vision journeyed, drummed, danced, birthed, lived in, visited, been led by my uterus for so many years. Like, I have loved the fucking shit out of my uterus to the point, you know, like parenting, where you're like, I have just like bitten everything out of that experience. I want forever, the end, no regrets. So it's actually not my uterus, because they leave the ovaries in so you don't go into early menopause. So it's literally my cycle. And but what I've heard or what I've read from other women is that they still hormonally experience a cycle. They just don't get the bleed. So I'm like, actually, I could say goodbye to my uterus, because I have fucking loved it so hard for so many years. But what I don't want to say goodbye to yet is my cervix, because cervical orgasms are like fucking crack. I don't actually know. I've never had crack, but that's what I think.
Crack would be like.
Cervical orgasms are like a bliss state that I have never known, have never been able to obtain another way. And I'm 40 and I'm not ready to give up cervical orgasms. But whoever I speak to about cervical orgasms, it's like a shock to them that women experience cervical orgasms. Like, it's a shock that that's even a thing, or that someone's mentioning it.
Did you mention it to the lady?
Yeah.
She was shocked by it?
She was just like, oh, never heard of that one. Okay. Righto. You know, just like this, which is pretty much the experience of everyone. And I have not been able to find someone who has, one, experienced cervical orgasms, and then two, had the removal of their cervix. And what I want to know is, do you still get them? Is it possible, like a ghost limb, to still experience a ghost experience of a cervical orgasm, because energetically it's still present in your body, even though physically it isn't? Or is that actually not possible? And when I lost my cervix, I lost my cervical orgasms. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So that is the call out. That is
the call out. I really, really, really want to hear from you. If you have experienced cervical orgasms, then have had your cervix removed, what is it like for you now? I want to know. What is it like for you if you have had your vagina cut open front and back and then put back together? Do you lose sensation? Because I'm looking at this going, am I about to lose my sexuality? Am I about to lose this part of me that feels like all of me sometimes?
Yeah.
Am I 40 and I'm about to have scar tissue and numbness when I have spent a lifetime rebuilding connection and healing trauma and having ecstatic sex? Am I about to say goodbye to that? I don't know. I don't know what happens after surgery.
And I mean, the hard thing is that how often are those stories disclosed to medical practitioners who can never even tell you that, right? Like,
well, and I asked her that. Yeah. And she's like, the problem is it's really subjective, right? Because when you look at all of the studies, women say their sex improves because when you've got a prolapse, everything loosens and drops and kind of the mouth of the vagina opens. So there's less pressure, so therefore less sensation, which is true. So without focused breath practice that I work really fucking hard on, my orgasms just on their own without trying have definitely diminished. Like, they're definitely not as heightened as they previously were. So I can see as the prolapse has gotten worse, my sexual satisfaction has dropped as well. So I can see that that is true. So her argument was, what she has heard of is from her patients is that when everything gets put back in the right place and is tightened, essentially, because it's all put back together, that sexual experience gets better. But of course it's subjective, and I don't know, and she doesn't know about cervical orgasms, and nobody does, and I can't find anyone who does, and I don't know what happens afterwards.
And there's also what's one person's definition of better sex versus your definition of better sex, right?
Right.
Is it like better friction, or is it deeper sensation? And if you're getting healing as a result of surgery, then that's not helping your sensation.
Exactly.
So nuanced.
It's so nuanced, and it feels like a rock and a hard place because I want my lifestyle back.
Yeah.
But I don't want to lose my sex.
Oh, Jules.
So it's a really shitty place to be. And part of the reason I'm having this conversation is, one, to see if anyone knows the answer or has lived experience, but also just because I can't find anyone who does. And how shit is that?
Yeah. Because it makes it that much more isolating.
Yeah, I can't be the only one. So that's my story. It's where I find myself. I want to choose surgery for me.
Yeah.
But I'm scared. And there's no guarantees. And it's still 6-week recovery.
And how you do that recovery is obviously also going to be incredibly important.
Right?
It's like going to be like almost like a post-birth lying in that you never got. Right. Like you have to do that if you want it to work.
Exactly. And I don't even know how I mean, obviously I would find a way, but I don't even know how to do that with 4 kids.
Yeah.
And there's the shame of asking for help and telling people the reason.
Yeah.
I'm having surgery. Like, I have to tell my kids too, right? I'm having surgery. I don't want to put fear of birth in my girls.
Yeah. It's a whole other layer, isn't it? Right.
So I don't know how to have that conversation. I obviously am going to need help from friends. I mean, friends is probably the easiest to tell, but my family, my in-laws, I'm going to sit there and talk about my vagina. Like, it just is so layered. Why am I not at basketball? So now I have to tell the basketball parents. You know, like, I'm just like,
you're almost having to live this experience into greater consciousness.
Yeah. So in a way, this is my first, like, this is happening. This is what I'm doing. This is my first step in facing my own shame story instead of keeping it silent and shameful, because it's fucking not. I haven't done anything wrong. There's nothing wrong with me. I have an injury. And if that were a man's penis, if that were a man's Achilles, you can bet your bottom fucking dollar we'd have surgery straight away for that.
Oh, God. Like, yes. And yet here, I still can't get over the fact that this specialist is telling you, we don't know how to fix this.
Yeah. Because we've never had anyone invest research in it.
But then I'm also not surprised, because didn't medicine up until very recently completely not even believe about women's G-spots or understand women's sexual...
Yeah, it's true.
Right?
Even the clitoris, right? It's a fairly 10-year recent kind of discovery.
So when you consider that, I'm kind of not surprised, but I'm also enraged.
Yeah,
that we've explored enough of the human body that's important to us, and now we're going to go colonize Mars.
Right. But can you imagine if it was a man's penis that was collapsing?
Oh, fuck.
Like, can you imagine?
Oh, my God.
The amount of research we would have.
We'd have, like, a percentage of the GDP dedicated to to researching us.
Exactly.
Oh my God. The contrast is so stark.
It just makes me so angry.
Fuck.
So if you've listened this far, I just want to say thanks for listening. Because that was a lot of...
And like, I really want to say, like, I just love the way in which you tell your story, because it just puts words and feelings to so many others, I'm sure.
I hope.
Other women who have sat in these specialist rooms, you know, and who've been
felt the shame and the blame,
gaslit, given no, you know, next step, or blamed, or
proper examination. Like, just none of it.
Also, you know, how many women, and I'm guessing that I'm one of them, are walking around with a first stage prolapse, you know, with one that they don't quite aren't quite sure is one, but that if it's not appropriately managed becomes one, because this is also what happens, right? Like,
exactly.
The bigger your babies and the more babies you have, the more likelihood you're going to have a uterine prolapse or some kind of prolapse. And so, but because there's no public awareness campaign of women looking after their pelvic floor, and, you know, women having, you know, because really we probably should be having intervals of checkups on our pelvic area, you know, X number of years after you have children, because we know that the time has an impact on, you know, how well that area heals and all of that. But there's nothing, I guess, until you walk around and start to feel it like it's, you know, like it's all falling out.
Yeah. Oh, poor you. You must not have done enough. You haven't looked after yourself enough.
You didn't sit at the traffic lights and do your exercises, Julie.
Right. This is the part that kind of kills my heart. Is the amount of, we don't offer support systems, we don't support you at all, and then we'll blame you and shame you when it doesn't work.
Yeah. It's the classic though, like, we'll just absolve ourselves of any responsibility and put it back on you rather than have to, because responsibility means, oh shit, we have to do something, like, as a system, as a government, as a peak body.
Yeah.
But then they're also us, right? So we can only change these things if we remove what's so shrouded in shame, because as long as it stays shameful, it stays silent, and it becomes silent suffering. And nothing happens in silent suffering.
No,
it just continues to be perpetuated.
It's so true. While it stays silent, yeah, it's never going to be part of the conversation or paradigm for change. Yeah. God, so true. Thank you. Thank you for listening and holding that, and, as always, having exactly the right things to say at exactly the right time. You are a master at it. It's, you know, I really appreciate everybody's openness to have this conversation with me, even though it's awkward and full of all of the stuff that we would rather not deal with, right? The messiness.
I kind of love that we're moving into, like, you know, this is our 7th year of podcasting, right? So we've done the light and the beautiful, delicious pregnancies, and we've done, like, the birth hormones, we've done the breastfeeding. But now we're meeting, like, you know, the woman in...
Yeah, it's true.
Knee deep in motherhood, like, in the trenches, kids are growing up, bodies shifting and changing. Oh, this is what I'm meeting.
Yeah.
And this is the truth of it.
Yeah.
These are the stories we have to tell if we're to be able to speak the unspoken voice of motherhood and to create nourishment for that place.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. So if you have a similar experience to me, I would love to hear from you. If you've had a hysterectomy, I would love to hear from you. And most especially, if you are familiar with cervical orgasms and you have lost your cervix, please tell me what it's like. If you've had your vagina cut open and then put back together, please tell me what your sex is like. I would just like more information.
So people can email you at?
Yes, hello@julietenner.love, or on the messages, right? You can message through your DM, PM, whichever it is, through Nourishing the Mother, and I will get it. Bridgie and I read it, or through my channel at julietenner.love. So I would just really love to hear your experience.
Thank you, Julie, for sharing.
Thanks, Bridgie, for holding.
Now, what's coming up for you? What's coming up in your spaces?
Oh, well, as is always my journey, complete with prolapse, is always sexual healing. So, I mean, there's a certain
It's your sexual healing with a side of prolapse.
With a side of prolapse. But also, you know, why I want to continue to have a voice in the space of sexual healing, because I am a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. I've abused my own body. It's been abused by men. I've birthed 4 babies. I have an, in inverted commas, imperfect, injured pelvic region and vagina. Like, I get it. And yet you can still have ecstatic and extraordinary shame-free sex. And so I still want to be the voice for that.
Yeah. And actually,
even in my messiness. Right?
Yeah, but isn't that the most accessible permission-giving way to make that a possibility for any woman? I think it is.
I hope so.
Because what it does is it removes so many more of the barriers that are in the way, right?
Yeah, I hope so.
It's not like you've had this perfect, just arrived here.
Yeah, or even just perfect lived, right? Even in the tantric community who are familiar with cervical orgasms, apparently no one has vaginal prolapses. So it's like,
so how many of them have had kids?
Well, I think that's the problem, right? Yeah, not terribly many, which is why I want to have voice. Anyway, long story short, so actually while I've been in ISO this week, I've created a free mini course, which I'll be releasing tomorrow, which is Tantric 101 Trust. So it's 5 lessons on building, establishing, healing and repairing trust, most notably to give a beautiful underlying connection point for sexual intimacy with you and your partner. So I would love for you to experience that. So I will put that out in all of the places and spaces in Nourishing Mother and julietenner.love. So I would love for you to delve into how you trust yourself, your partner and your relationship and your body a little bit deeper.
How beautiful. What a gift.
And you, Bridgie?
Yes, it's all things reimagining motherhood community for me, and also that I'm really noticing how much we need to have the grounding and support for mothers beyond the resentment, kind of beyond the overfunctioning, moving into resentment cycle that I see so many mothers do or get caught up in. And then what then happens is the mummy wine club as a way to deal with that, which is actually not really a way to deal with it. It's a way to avoid it. So my flow mini course, Mind Body Mothering, is a really beautiful way to just recalibrate your own relationship with your children and your mothering and your family dynamic. I think in many ways it's the antithesis to resentment. So I'm inviting women to explore that this month, which you can find out more at bridgetwood.life.
That's so beautiful, flow, mind, body, mothering. How freaking gorgeous is that?
Well, don't we all want more flow, right?
Like, but even just mind, body, mothering, like what a revelation.
Yeah, thanks.
Rather than exiting the body.
Yeah, well, because ultimately, I mean, as you and I know, mothering pulls you into your body in ways perhaps you haven't been asked to be in it before. And if we don't really understand that, we make the problem outside of ourselves rather than being able to meet ourselves and where we are. So the course is really around bringing neurobiological principles in, which is really around our energy that we're holding or responding to, and how to kind of build skills around understanding that in our children and ourselves and our family so we can flow better.
Super beautiful. So you can connect with us at bridgetwood.life, julietenner.love and nourishingthemother.com.au, and same on all the socials.
Yes. Remember to nourish the woman to rock the family.
And we'll see you next week when we continue to peel back the layers on your mothering journey.
Thank you so much for listening. We literally couldn't do this without you. Please share this podcast with anyone you think it would be medicine for.
If you desire to integrate your learnings practically and supportively into your life, then head on over to bridgetwood.life or julietenner.love to go deeper.
And if you feel like giving back a little to this free content, please rate us on iTunes or Facebook, all of which helps the podcast reach more mamas who need this type of tonic for the soul.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/The Wellness Couch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives.
Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavour to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.